So hopeful project this morning is to remove the last wiring off the barn here. I pulled all the interior wires out a couple years ago, and we got these wires here that run along under the eave around the corner, and then they went up to the pole on the roof that where the power came in and out. This was kind of a drop-off point, and then from here overhead wire went over to the yard light pole, and up until last fall those wires were there, and they came from the pole over there, and they were all live. And this barn is getting in really bad shape. It's actually not the safest to go in it anymore, and I'm certainly not going to walk on the haymow floor. There's been leaking holes up there for a long time. There's probably soft spots, and I don't want to fall through. So I got the wire, had an electrician come in here last fall, got the wires off up there. So this is all dead and disconnected. So I'm going to try to get as much of this wire. I told him to strip off the wire off the pole, but he never did, and I guess that's alright. My ladder isn't high enough. I do have a extension ladder, but I don't feel safe going up on that. I'm a little too heavy for it these days, to put it mildly. So I got my 10-foot step ladder here, and I'm going to at least get the stuff on the eaves off under here, and then there's actually a copper ground rod there that I'd like to pull up, copper wire from the ground. This is some I don't know, salvageable lumber for something I pulled out of here that I'll move somewhere else before it gets wet and ruined. Yeah, that's got manure on it, so it's not usable for everything, but it could be usable for something. At any rate, in here, those wires came in here and went to this breaker box. Everything from the breaker box on has been removed, so the goal is, the breaker box and the wires coming in and outside are all going hopefully today. Yeah, it's getting a little sketchy in here. You can see where water's been running between the cracks and the boards from the haymow up there, which is one reason I'm not wandering up there. And there's a lot of other structural issues. This barn's been leaking for a long time, and it's been getting, I wouldn't know if it's exponentially worse, but considerably worse in, let's say, the last 5 years. So all the stuff out of this milk room, I stripped all that out of here a couple years ago because this water's been running in it. And yeah, the support beam has been pushed into the ground. The concrete's fractured from water running in and freezing. This definitely holes up here, holes in the roof. You can see up in the haymow roof from here, which you're not supposed to do. What is that? It's probably some boards falling out. So, needless to say, this place is not good. Yeah, that wall is getting a lot worse this year, I noticed. That roof has had a hole in it for a couple of years now. And, but yeah, there used to be, light fixtures and what have you in here, and I've pulled all them out. There was an exhaust fan in that hole there. So I was trying to get everything out of here for some potential demolition or something. The rules on demolitions around here are pretty stringent. Plumbing and wiring, yeah, there was some plumbing in here as well. That's all been removed. Plumbing and wiring pulled out, and then asbestos inspections. And you can't even really bury something like this without a special landfill permit. And literally, I was talking to my cousin yesterday at a family gathering, and he has a building on his property he'd like to get rid of, and he was telling me that he was quoted something north of $50,000 to dispose of the building the proper way. So he wasn't sure what he was going to do, because it was, in a vacant building in poor repair that he can't use, and 50,000 is, a lot for something like that. But yeah, I mean, this is looking a little sketchy in here. The other thing I'd like to get out of this building, out of this barn, is there's a rope. So they used to use, it's too bright up there, there's like a track up on the peak, and then there's like kind of a manual hoist assembly thing hanging up there, and then there's a rope, and I have the rope all piled in a pile there, and I need to put something like a knife on something and cut the rope off up there as far as I can, because I want to save the rope for unknown reasons. But it's not ruined yet, but it will be if it starts getting water dripping on it from all the holes in the ceiling and elsewhere. So like many old barns in the Midwest, this one will be gone at some point as well. Well, I snipped off that one wire right there. Like I was saying earlier, you need a higher ladder to get up any, and I do have a extension ladder. I don't feel comfortable with it. And then the larger cloth covered wire, cloth covered, from the 40s, is right next to it. And I was using this big old fence staple puller, and you can cut things off with it too. It's not super sharp. The small wire, no problem. The big wire, probably a problem. And I'm guessing I am not going to cut that one off as high, because I was barely able to reach up to that spot, and you can't get enough leverage. So I'll move the ladder over and cut it off a little lower down where it's safer. I see there's also the ground wire is running parallel with it. I did not know that before. Yeah, I don't know how it was wired up there on that pole. Original wiring on this farm was done in the 40s, and it was mostly never replaced unless something went bad or it quit working. So it was only repairs as needed, or replacement as needed, or additions as needed, and there were very few of those. So yeah, that cloth jacketed cable is darn near 80 years old, if it isn't 80 years old right now, depending on when it was made back in the day. And had power on it all this time up until last fall, and didn't catch anything on fire. Maybe that would have been a blessing if it had burned the barn down, because then it'd be easier to dispose of the remains than it's going to be now. Okay, so I'm going to move the ladder, cut that off, and proceed around the side of the barn pulling that off. It's going to be a little more work. Down there we have the whole length of that other wire. It's a newer plastic coated wire. I'd guess from the 60s, but I don't know for sure. I don't ever remember that being worked on, and I grew up here in the 70s and the 80s, so it's older than that. Chopped off that cloth covered stuff and pulled one of the, I wouldn't call it a staple, it's more like a clamp or something off the wall. Can't reach the rest of it. Maybe if there's another reason to have a bucket guy in here, we could remove the rest of it. Even though I got a bunch of them just like that from other stuff that's been torn down around here over the years. At any rate, after I get this wire off, we're going to take a little bit of a look at how it's constructed, because I'm a little bit surprised. It looks like there's like a braided sheath on it. It's not two wires wrapped up, it's something else. I'll get it on the ground and we'll take a look. Okay, we're down to the last clamp here, and the ground wire rod, but I'll leave that for the last thing, pull that up. After I get this one off of here, I should be able to disconnect it off the breaker panel inside the building and try to drag it out. I guess I should, if I wasn't dumb, I'd just cut this whole thing into chunks. It's all very brittle. I mean, I've had to pry on this in a few places to get the clamps off, and it's like as hard as a rock. Like this spot here, it's just broke. It like snapped right there because it's 80-year-old cloth and probably rubber on the inside. Amazing that it was still not shorting out all these years. But all right, I'm going to take that off and then we'll go work inside. So I have no attempt to like disconnect the wires inside this breaker box. I am just gonna try to snip them off, and this looks like it's a two-handed effort. So I'll pause the video and I'll do the deed. Okay, I have wires removed or chopped off of this. So what's the easiest way to? I wonder if I'm gonna just pry the whole thing off this beam, but another two-handed job. So we'll see about prying this off. Kind of looks like there's just a board nailed there, and maybe easier just to pry the whole board off, and hopefully the screws in the fuse box or breaker box don't go through the board and into the beam, because it might be a bear to pull it off. We'll see. Well, it wasn't too bad prying this breaker box off. So my thinking recollection on this was a silage unloader got installed around 1973, and that necessitated a 240 volt connection, and I think this breaker box was installed at that point, and there must have been probably a pair of screw-in fuses, switch type box somewhere, maybe in the same place before this one. So a lot of history there, I guess. Haven't cut off that ground wire. However, this is a good example of how brittle this old sheathed cable is from the 40s. It's a place where I bent it while I've been moving it around. It's just, the insulation is just completely snapped, and you can hear it cracking and crumbling when I try to bend it. Very stiff. I'm gonna have a look. I'm interested to know, man. You can see there's like an exterior woven sheath, and I don't know if there's two wires inside or one. Well, I guess we'll find out here a little later after I start cleaning up. We'll take a look at a cut off end of this. All right, I think I'm just going to try to get the wires removed from the ground rod for now. I'll need some other kind of equipment to pull that rod out. It's probably 6 or 7 feet long, and who knows if it's going to come up. So all the wire and stuff is off the barn, but we'll take a look at some of this. Some of this was kind of surprising to me, and first thing I was surprised with were these loopy hold downs that were nailed to the wall to hold that big old cloth cable on. And I've seen these type of things on other old buildings, and they were always galvanized, or appeared galvanized. Maybe they were zinc or something, but these ones are all brass, and they were put in with these shingle nails. And if most of the nails had come out a little easier, they'd probably be all intact. I busted a few of them. Actually, this one is more like that's the kind of more, they look kind of galvanized or zinc or something. But yeah, most of them are brass here. Kind of interesting. I think I've seen brass ones before. So this is the clamp that was on the ground rod down by the soil that the bare copper ground wires are attached to, and obviously it's made out of brass or some other non-corroding material. Come right loose, no problems. These are little weather hoods. They're on the wall and they feel pretty light. I bet they're aluminum. There's the later looking 2-wire that I believe was for a 3-way with the yard light switch from the house at one time. And next we have this breaker box from the 70s that's been in a ammonia infested barn, had been for decades and so on. So you can see where this old cloth cable came in and this ground wire. And it's kind of interesting in here. Get my shadow out of the way. So it looks like this one was a red, and it went to, I guess these be the hots, I think. And then the ground was attached to this, and yeah, when I pulled all the wiring out of here, if there was an earth wire, and most of them didn't, they were attached to this. And then the exterior braid of this cable, and we'll look at that in a moment, also went over to the earth connection. So the exterior braid of that cable, that cloth cable, was tied to earth ground, and then we had actually it would have been 2 hots because there was 240 coming in here. So yeah, there was 240 coming into this box, so that would have been the neutral. And that's why the neutral was tied to ground here, and then it went to a ground rod, outside of the building. So I'd have to look at this more carefully. Like some of these breakers, like the 50 amp one here, that one was for that silage unloader, and these other 2 were for just, looks like they're, one's a 20, is that a 20? And the other one's a 15. Those would have been for a couple outlets and lights in the barn. There weren't a whole lot of lights and outlets in there actually. Alright, and now we have our copper ground cable all rolled up, and there's 2 sizes of it. This one's a larger gauge than this other one. And then there was some splice connectors here that I did not attempt to take off. I bet they'd come right off though, a little effort. They're just brass. But the most interesting part is this heavy sheath cable that ran along the wall, came from the pole on the roof, went into the breaker box. So I peeled back the end here to show how it was constructed. So the outside is seems like it might be 2 layers of, like the inner layer looks like it was like rubber or tar or something, impregnated cloth, and then there's an overall another cloth braid on it, and then there's this like woven bare copper braid that apparently, yeah, that was the neutral from what we could see from the breaker box. And then we have 2 conductors, like a red and a black, and those have like a rubber coating that's wrapped over with cloth. Yeah, so it wasn't all cloth. There was, rubber molded over the wire, and then they over wrap that with cloth. And yeah, all this stuff is very brittle, and you can like bust chunks off of it. This end is probably in better shape because it was inside the barn. That's why the outer jacket isn't as weathered, and it looks like it must have been gray originally. This white stuff is like lime whitewash that used to spray on the walls in barns. Whereas, the stuff that was out in the weather for the last 80 years is, like crumbling here. If you bend it, it's just crumbling. So it's a good thing to get the power off of that. This definitely wouldn't pass any kind of safety inspection, although I guess if it's not disturbed, and it hadn't been, so it was what it was, and you disturb it and it starts to crumble. I remember when I was a student back in the 80s, some guys and I had a rented house that was a dump, and The light fixture upstairs hall had some crappy bare wires hanging out of it that I complained to the landlord, and he just thought, well, these are electrical engineering students, I'll just give them a new fixture and they can put it in. Huh. Yeah, so being young and dumb and whatever, I was like standing on the upstairs rail banister. One slip and I would have fallen down the stairs and broke my neck. And so I was up there replacing the fixture, and the wires coming out of the attic were very brittle, and if you touched them, they'd like poof, poof. You know, I'm sure the heat of that lamp had cooked them over the decades, and the house was probably built in the 20s, if I'd have to guess, maybe the 30s. And I ended up going to a hardware store to get some liquid tape goop to goop up the wires so they wouldn't touch the metal thing up in there and short out. So yeah, free electrical work for a scumlord landlord, but things that happen when you're a college student and either you don't know any better, or you can't afford it, or what have you. People might take advantage of your situation. Last time I checked on Google Earth, that house was still there, so it hasn't burnt down. Huh. Alright, I think that'll be the end of this little video about pulling old wiring out of the old dairy barn over there. All for now.